You're nothing but a liar. Take your fake medals and get out." The words hit the lobby like a slap. Sharp, public, impossible to ignore. For a split second, even the whir of the bank's old ceiling fan seems to stop. Everyone in the bank turns. Some stare, some smirk, and a few, always quick on the draw, raise their phones, ready to record whatever happens next. Martin Ellis is standing at the counter, thin and stoop-shouldered, his silver hair curling from under a faded blue cap with a logo most people would mistake for a gas station. His coat is worn at the elbows, his shoes soft at the toes, but his posture is impossibly straight for a man his age. He looks directly at the teller without blinking, hands gentle but sure on a battered envelope of paperwork. Behind the counter, Lucas, barely old enough to grow a beard, fresh out of business school and all restless energy, recoils from Martin's papers like they might stain his polished shirt. Lucas's voice tries for firm but lands closer to flustered. "Sir, are you sure this account belongs to you?" His tone is brittle, rehearsed. Martin doesn't answer right away. He just glances at the line forming behind him. A mother rocking her toddler, a delivery driver tapping at his phone, a couple arguing in whispers about whether to order checks. For a moment, Martin is just another body in the long procession of people waiting for things to be decided by strangers. The manager arrives. Ms. Page is efficient, pressed, and carries the faint aura of someone who never sits down at her own kitchen table. She looks Martin over with the kind of clinical distance used for delicate machinery. "Sometimes," she says to Lucas, with a gentle smile that's really not for Martin at all, "older folks get confused about these things. It happens." A ripple of knowing laughter travels through the line. Martin, still silent, slides a small battered badge, a relic few in the room would recognize, across the counter. It catches the morning light for a heartbeat. Lucas ignores it. Ms. Page doesn't even glance down. Instead, she waves a security guard over, just in case. Martin's hand trembles, but only slightly. He nods, moves aside as instructed, and sits down near the window. He stares out at the gray morning. Across the street, a flag hangs limp on its pole. Inside the bank, the story has already moved on to the next customer. What nobody here knows is that in less than 10 minutes, everything about this moment will be turned upside down. The minutes grind by. Martin sits quietly, studying the branches scratching the frosted glass. His breath clouds the window. Occasionally, someone glances his way, a look heavy with suspicion, a snicker, or just that quick, dismissive shrug reserved for the invisible. Lucas is still at the counter, now hunched over Martin's paperwork. He examines the faded print, the slightly mismatched middle initial. "You know," he says to Ms. Page, his voice raised just enough for the waiting crowd to hear, "anyone could fake these old documents these days. It's practically a cottage industry." A few in the lobby snort their agreement. Ms. Page folds her arms, signals to the security guard. Henry, a man old enough to remember when banks closed early on Thursdays, to keep an eye on Martin. Martin nods when Henry glances his way, but otherwise remains motionless. He's seen this kind of suspicion before. It leaves a familiar ache at the base of his neck. Martin moves to the far side of the waiting area, folds his hands in his lap, and closes his eyes. For a moment, the noise of the bank becomes distant, almost gentle. He remembers a different kind of waiting, a dusty tent in a country with no winter, or a line of stretchers on the tarmac as dawn burned the horizon. He opens his eyes and catches sight of a woman in a navy windbreaker watching him. She's in her 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes alert but kind. Andrea Tran, once a medic, now just another face in the crowd. She notices the badge on Martin's coat, the kind of emblem you don't buy, you earn. Something about the symbol stirs a memory. A briefing, a rescue gone wrong, a name whispered with respect. Andrea hesitates, then steps forward. "Excuse me," she says, voice low. "Did you ever serve with the Ridge Unit?" Martin nods. His lips almost smile, but not quite. Andrea turns to the counter, her voice stronger now. "You might want to check your records. That badge isn't something you find online." Lucas scowls but doesn't answer. Miss Page sighs, as if she's heard this kind of plea before. Someone in line mutters, "Always a story." But Andrea's words settle into the air, an uncertainty that hangs over the lobby. Meanwhile, Henry the security guard stands by the door, eyes narrowed. He studies Martin, then steps into the side office. There, he dials a number from memory, keeping his voice just above a whisper. "He's here," he says. "You might want to come quick." Another customer, a young man in a paint-splattered hoodie, offers his chair to an elderly woman, glancing nervously toward the counter. The mood is shifting, uneasy, uncertain. Martin waits. The seconds tick by, loud in the hush. His badge rests on his knee, his gaze drifting between the dusty floor and the uncertain faces around him. The world seems to narrow to the sound of the door hinges and the hush of the heating vents. Then the doors open with a suddenness that startles everyone. Boot heels strike the tile with a sharp, deliberate rhythm. The cold air that blows in is edged with rain and something else. Authority, invisible but heavy. Colonel Nathan Pierce steps into the bank, dress uniform immaculate, face unreadable except for the set of his jaw. At his side is a young aide, clutching a briefcase, gaze locked ahead. Every conversation in the bank falters, then stops. For a breathless second, nobody moves. Ms. Page's fingers freeze mid-gesture. Lucas lets a paper slip from his hand. Even the security guard stands a little straighter. Pierce surveys the room and, without hesitation, walks straight toward Martin. He halts before the old man, heels together, and snaps a salute that cracks the air. His aide stands a respectful distance behind, silent. Martin looks up, confusion flickering behind his tired eyes. For a moment, time seems suspended. An old soldier and a decorated officer, face to face. The years between them collapsing into this small space. Pierce lowers his hand and asks, voice low but unmistakably clear, "May I see your documents, sir?" Martin hesitates, then wordlessly hands over his battered envelope and the silver badge. Pierce studies them in silence, the weight of his scrutiny visible in the set of his shoulders. The crowd leans in, curiosity battling with disbelief. Pierce turns to face the lobby. His voice is calm, almost gentle, but it fills every corner of the room. "This is Martin Ellis. He led the Sable Ridge Rescue Unit. His record, his actions, are known and remembered by those who needed help most." A hush falls, a different kind of silence now, one of recognition and shame. From the briefcase, the aide removes a velvet-lined box. Pierce opens it, revealing a gleaming badge, larger, brighter, unmistakably official. With the care of a ritual, he pins the badge to Martin's worn coat. The metal flashes, catching a stray sunbeam through the window. Ms. Page's mouth opens, then closes. Lucas lowers his eyes. Andrea blinks back sudden tears, her hands trembling as she presses them to her chest. Pierce meets Martin's gaze. "I apologize for your wait, sir. Your service is the foundation of what we have today." Martin's eyes shine, but his voice is steady. "Thank you, Colonel." No one speaks. One by one, customers stand. Some salute. Some simply rise, hats in hand or hands over hearts. The room fills with a kind of reverence that has nothing to do with the marble floor or the vaults of cash, but with something earned in silence and sacrifice. Martin steps to the counter, collects the envelope the teller now offers with both hands. Andrea, still near, gives him a gentle nod. The hush in the lobby has changed, no longer awkward, but filled with respect. A mother lifts her child so she can see. The security guard shifts to attention. A man near the exit wipes his eyes and tries to pretend it's just the dust. Martin does not linger. He takes his withdrawal, just enough, he quietly explains, to help his grandchild with tuition this month. The teller, hands shaking, gives him the receipt and whispers a soft apology. Martin accepts it with a nod, nothing more. Colonel Pierce turns to Ms. Page. If you have a wall for recognition, add his name. No stories, no explanation, just his name and the years he served. Ms. Page, voice hoarse, says she will. Martin turns to leave, the new badge catching on the cuff of his coat as he buttons it. Andrea steps forward, offering a gentle embrace. Wordless, but understood. Lucas, eyes red, apologizes. Henry, at the door, comes to attention and opens it wide. Outside, the rain has stopped. Sunlight pours across the steps, painting long shadows. As Martin steps into the light, there's a sense, unspoken but deeply felt, that everyone inside the bank will remember this morning far longer than any headline. In the background, a young man helps an elderly woman with her purse. Ms. Page straightens a stack of brochures, then pauses, looking at the spot where Martin stood. Andrea, voice barely above a whisper, says, "Some heroes don't want to be remembered, but we remember anyway." Martin walks away, steps slow but unbowed, his head high at last. The scene lingers on the new plaque at the bank's entrance. Martin Ellis, for service beyond record. Sometimes the people who've given the most are the ones who ask for the least. Every act of respect, no matter how small, can change a life. Thank you for being here for this story. Martin stood at the curb for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle into his bones. The air was sharp and clean, the street quiet except for the distant sound of a delivery truck. He looked down at the badge pinned to his coat, a silver glint that seemed to burn away decades of doubt. For a long time he had worn his history quietly, tucked away in pockets and memories, believing there was no place left for men like him. Yet here, in a place as ordinary as a small-town bank, a door had opened that he never expected. Behind him, the bank's glass doors swung shut with a soft click. Martin turned back for a moment and saw Henry, the security guard, still holding the door, standing at attention. For a second, their eyes met. There was nothing said, but everything was understood. A silent salute passed between two men from different eras, connected by a code few people ever truly know. Inside the lobby, the mood had changed completely. Where there had been suspicion, there was now a gentle hush. A mother helped her toddler off a chair and almost instinctively stooped to help an elderly customer with her coat. Andrea lingered by the counter, still blinking away tears, as she watched Ms. Page approach the teller window where Lucas stood. She leaned in, speaking softly, words lost in the hum of the building. But her posture was different now. Shoulders lowered, head slightly bowed. Martin walked slowly, the pace of his footsteps steady but free of the heaviness he carried before. Each stride seemed to gather a little more warmth from the sunlight, as if the world itself had shifted just a fraction to meet him. He paused at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A passing teenager, earbuds in, paused his music and reached out. "Sir, you dropped this." Returning a folded handkerchief Martin hadn't noticed had slipped from his pocket. The old man smiled, the gesture quick but genuine. He thought of his grandchild, how the money would help with the first semester's books or a new pair of shoes. He could almost hear the laughter, the way young people fill a house with noise and promise. For a moment, Martin let himself feel proud, not for the things he'd done in the past, but for the small, present kindnesses that made those sacrifices worthwhile. Back inside, Andrea was gathering her bag, ready to leave. Before she exited, she approached Ms. Page. "You did the right thing in the end," Andrea said gently, her voice calm, no trace of accusation. Ms. Page managed a small, grateful nod, her composure now wrapped in humility instead of pride. Lucas, still rattled, asked Andrea quietly, "Who was he really?" Andrea answered with a softness that didn't quite hide her awe. "He's the reason you have the freedom to ask that question." As the day moved on, small gestures of respect continued to ripple through the room. The elderly woman who had struggled earlier was now seated comfortably, a young teller bringing her a glass of water. Someone straightened a stack of magazines, moving just a little more carefully than before. Ms. Page stepped into her office and began filling out a request for a plaque. Simple, unadorned, no backstory. Just a name, and beneath it, "For service beyond record." The sun climbed higher, catching the letters on the bank's glass and making them shimmer. Martin stood across the street, watching for a moment as Henry finally allowed himself to relax, rolling his shoulders and returning to his post. Andrea exited, caught Martin's eye, and offered a subtle nod, both of them knowing that something quiet but important had changed. Not just for Martin, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Martin turned, finally ready to head home. Each step away from the bank felt easier. For years, he had convinced himself that the best kind of service was the kind no one ever saw. Today had proven him both right and wrong. Service did not need an audience, but sometimes recognition could restore more than just a man's pride. That evening, after the last customer had left, Miss Page walked the empty lobby, her heels echoing on the marble floor. She paused by the entry, fingers tracing the spot where the new plaque would be mounted. For a long time, she stood in silence, thinking of the way Martin had carried himself, with dignity, with patience, with a strength she had nearly overlooked. She resolved quietly to never make that mistake again. Down the block, Martin's phone buzzed, a message from his grandchild, excited about the coming semester, asking if he would visit soon. Martin replied simply, "Always." He looked up, seeing his reflection in the shop windows, and for the first time in a long while, he saw not just an old man, but a survivor, a foundation for something larger than himself. Days later, the new plaque was fixed near the bank's entrance. Customers paused to read it, some asking who Martin Ellis was, others simply running their fingers over the engraved letters. The staff said little, but there was a new attentiveness in the way they greeted older patrons, in the respect they showed to anyone who walked through the doors. Andrea, teaching her next gym class, found herself sharing the story with her students, not as a tale of glory or medals, but as a lesson in humility and the power of seeing others for who they really are. She ended the story simply. Respect isn't about applause. It's about choosing to see someone, even when everyone else looks away. On her way home, Andrea stopped by the bank. She paused at the door, reading the plaque one more time, her hand lingering over the words. As she walked away, a gentle breeze caught the edge of her jacket, and she smiled. Sometimes, the people who've given the most are the ones who ask for the least. Every act of respect, no matter how small, can change a life. Thank you for being here for this story. Night fell softly over the little town, the streetlights flickering on one by one, their glow catching in puddles left by the morning rain. In his modest apartment just a few blocks from the bank, Martin set his cap and new badge gently on the table, as if both might disappear if handled too roughly. He sank into his favorite chair, the one with the threadbare armrest and the sun-faded cushion, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The room was quiet except for the distant tick of the kitchen clock and the muffled sounds of a television from the neighbor's apartment. Martin took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. On the table lay the receipt from the bank, his paperwork now neatly stacked, and the letter from his grandchild's school. The badge gleamed against the dull wood, proof of something that could never be explained on paper. For years, Martin had lived his life in the background, never asking for a discount, never mentioning his service except when absolutely required, never thinking himself special or worthy of attention. He had believed, as so many do, that the world had little room for stories like his anymore. Yet today, something had shifted. It wasn't about the apology, the salute, or the public recognition. It was the way the room had changed. A pause, a ripple, the slow realization that respect was sometimes owed long before it was given. He remembered Andrea's words. You might want to check your records. That badge isn't something you find online. He smiled, just a little, thinking how small acts of courage can matter in places no one expects. He wondered if Andrea even knew what a difference she'd made, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Maybe that was how the world moved forward, one quiet nudge at a time. His phone chimed again. A photo arrived. His grandchild beaming, holding a thick stack of new textbooks, a simple caption underneath. Thank you, Grandpa. Martin stared at the screen, warmth flooding his chest, the day's heaviness dissolving into something softer. Outside, the town settled in for the night. In the bank, the cleaning crew polished the floor, careful around the new plaque. One worker, young and distracted, stopped to read it. He looked over his shoulder at the empty lobby, then back at the simple inscription. There was no explanation, no list of accomplishments. Just a name and 4 words. For service beyond record. The worker stood for a moment, thoughtful, then continued with his mop, moving just a bit slower, as if not wanting to disturb the stillness left behind. At the apartment, Martin rose and opened the window, letting the night air in. He gazed up at the dark, cloud-scattered sky, feeling, at last, a sense of peace. He thought of the lives he'd crossed paths with, the moments of kindness and pain, the invisible bonds that held people together even when they didn't know each other's names. He didn't know if he'd ever return to that bank. Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't. What mattered now was the knowledge that even in the most ordinary places, the truth of a person's life could be seen, if only for a moment. And that sometimes, that moment was enough. In the days that followed, small changes began to bloom throughout the town. The story made its way, quietly, from teller to customer, from neighbor to neighbor. People seemed to pause a little longer before making judgments. Younger veterans who rarely spoke of their service began to greet Martin on the street with a nod or a quiet, "Thank you, sir." Henry, the security guard, stopped him outside the pharmacy to share a cup of coffee and a few words about their younger days. Andrea sent a note, handwritten, thanking Martin for reminding her, and everyone, that respect wasn't something given by accident. The world outside remained complicated, noisy, and often indifferent. But here in these small acts, A door held open, a patient ear, a handshake. There was proof that change was possible. Martin walked a little taller, his badge sometimes tucked away, sometimes on display, but always a part of him now. And always, on the wall of Summit Savings Bank, the plaque remained. Each new visitor read it as they entered, some passing by without a thought, others pausing just long enough to let the words settle. No one asked for the story, no one needed to. Its lesson was clear, even in silence. Sometimes, the greatest legacy is not the battles won or the medals earned, but the quiet dignity of a life lived well and a lesson left behind for others to find. As spring crept into the town, its streets filled with a new kind of energy. Windows open to let in the warm breeze, children's laughter floating down from park swings, the scent of fresh-cut grass drifting through neighborhoods that had grown used to routine. Yet for some, the memory of that quiet morning at Summit Savings Bank lingered, shaping the way they moved through their days. Martin became a familiar sight again, walking to the corner grocery, exchanging a few quiet words with neighbors, or pausing to pick up a stray piece of litter along the sidewalk. People who might once have glanced past him now saw him with new eyes. Sometimes he'd catch their gaze and smile, a simple acknowledgement that required nothing in return. He stopped by the post office one afternoon to buy stamps. The clerk, a young woman who had been in the bank lobby that day, smiled shyly and handed him an extra sheet, her way of saying thank you without words. In small businesses up and down Main Street, the staff had started recognizing not just Martin, but other elderly regulars too, offering chairs, refilling coffee, listening a little more closely to the stories that used to fade in the hum of daily life. One Saturday, a local teacher invited Martin to speak at a school assembly for Veterans Day. Martin hesitated at first. He had never been comfortable in front of crowds, preferring his own company to a room full of applause. But Andrea, who was there helping organize the event, gently persuaded him. "Just tell them about your team," she said, "and what it means to stand up for someone, even when it isn't easy." Martin thought about it long and hard. On the day of the assembly, he wore his best shirt, the new badge pinned above his heart. He stood at the edge of the stage, hands folded behind his back, while the students settled into their seats. He didn't speak about battles or medals. Instead, he talked about the power of small acts, about courage that shows up in the quietest moments, about the value of listening, of paying attention when someone is being overlooked. He finished with a simple line: "You never know who you're standing next to, or what they've done for the people around you. Sometimes, the ones who never speak up are the ones who've done the most." The applause was gentle, respectful. As Martin left the stage, a few students came up to thank him. One boy pressed a hand-drawn card into his palm, a sketch of a silver badge with the words, "Thank you for serving," scrawled beneath it. Martin tucked it into his pocket, feeling its weight as real as any medal. The days that followed were much the same as before, and yet different in subtle, important ways. Martin felt the invisible thread of connection growing stronger, not just between himself and those who'd been there that day in the bank, but among the townspeople themselves. They greeted each other with a little more care, noticed when someone seemed lost or lonely, and remembered that sometimes honor is as simple as holding space for another person's story. The next time Martin visited the bank, the staff greeted him by name. The teller, no longer Lucas, but a new face, nervous but sincere, smiled as she handled his deposit. Miss Page, passing by, paused to ask about his family. Henry, now semi-retired, stopped in with coffee sitting across from Martin as they watched people come and go through the glass doors. And the plaque remained, a quiet marker, a daily reminder. Children walking with their parents would pause, asking about the name on the wall. Their parents, some who had been there that morning, others who'd only heard the story, found their own words to explain what it meant. That sometimes real heroism is invisible until the moment when someone needs to remember it most. As months became years, the memory of that day faded for some, but not for all. Martin grew older, his steps slower but his eyes brighter. He kept the card from the schoolboy in a drawer by his bed, the badge carefully polished, the letter from his grandchild tucked alongside. One quiet afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, Martin heard a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find a young man, no longer a child, but taller now, with nervous hands, holding out a worn envelope. "You might not remember me," the young man said, "but you spoke at my school years ago. You made me believe that quiet courage matters. I wanted to thank you for what you did, for who you are." Martin accepted the envelope. Inside was a simple hand-drawn card, a silver badge, and the words, "Thank you for showing me what honor looks like." Martin's throat tightened, emotion welling up unexpectedly. "Thank you," he whispered. "That means more than you know." The young man nodded, then turned to go, leaving Martin standing in the golden light, the card pressed to his heart. Sometimes, the people who've given the most are the ones who ask for the least. Every act of respect, no matter how small, can change a life. Thank you for being here for this story.